All right, let's go. Number 10. Chand Baori. Sometime around 800 CE, in the desert village of Abhaneri in Rajasthan, India, a workforce began cutting stone on a scale that modern structural engineers still pause to consider. When they finished, they had created a stepped well descending approximately 30 meters into the earth, with around 3,500 individual steps arranged across 13 perfectly symmetrical stories in an inverted, triangular formation that has no equivalent anywhere else in the ancient world. Chand Baori was built during the reign of King Chanda of the Nikumba dynasty, and it served the practical purpose of reaching groundwater in a region where the water table sits far below the surface. A stepwell, by definition, allows people to descend to the water level as it rises and falls with the seasons. Hundreds of stepwells were built across Rajasthan and Gujarat during this period. None of them look like this. The anomaly is the geometry. The 3,500 steps achieve a degree of bilateral symmetry across 13 descending stories that structural engineers who have studied the site describe as genuinely remarkable, a precision that would be demanding even with modern digital planning tools. The temperature at the base of the well is consistently 5 to 6 degrees Celsius cooler than the surface above, a natural microclimate that appears to have been an intentional design outcome rather than an accident. No contemporaneous written record describes the construction method, the workforce required, or the mathematical principles the builders used. An adjacent temple to the goddess Harshat Mata dates to the same period and confirms the site's religious significance alongside its practical function. The Archaeological Survey of India has documented the site extensively, but documentation is not the same as explanation. What we know is the shape. What we do not know is how an 800 CE construction team held that shape across 30 meters of descent without any surviving technical framework to show us how they reasoned their way to it. The well stands. The instructions for building it are gone. Number 9. The Well of St. Patrick. In 1527, Pope Clement VII faced a problem that was as much military as it was architectural. Orvieto, the hilltop city in Umbria, where he had taken refuge after the sack of Rome, sat 325 meters above the surrounding valley on a plateau of volcanic tufa rock. In the event of a siege, the city's water supply was entirely vulnerable. His solution was to commission architect Antonio da Sangallo the Younger to build a well, and what Sangallo designed has been studied by architects ever since. The brief was simple in principle and staggering in practice. The well needed to allow a continuous flow of laden donkeys to descend to the water at 53 meters depth and return to the surface without ever crossing paths with the animals coming the other way. Sangallo's answer was to carve two completely separate helical staircases inside a single circular shaft, each with 248 steps, arranged so that someone descending one staircase and someone ascending the other would share the same cylindrical space without ever meeting or seeing each other. This double helix configuration, cut through solid volcanic rock, was resolved without computer modeling, without any precedent in engineering history, and without a single structural revision after completion. 72 windows cut into the central shaft illuminate both staircases simultaneously from the same light source. The geometry required to plan this, purely in the mind and on paper, is the kind of three-dimensional spatial reasoning that most people cannot perform even as a thought experiment. Construction was completed in 1537, a decade after it began. The well was named Pozzo di San Patrizio, a reference to the legendary cave in Ireland associated with St. Patrick, because contemporaries felt that descending into it was its own kind of journey into the subterranean and the unknown. The name stuck because it was accurate. The structure has required no intervention since the day it was finished. Antonio da Sangallo the Younger solved in volcanic rock a spatial problem that has no parallel in the architecture of his era or before it. He got it right the first time, in 10 years, working by hand. The well still works exactly as he designed it. Number 8. The Pozzo della Cava, In 1984, a family running a ceramic shop in the historic center of Orvieto began renovating their basement and broke through a wall into a space that appeared on no city plan and matched no known record. Behind that wall was the beginning of a subterranean complex of tunnels, chambers, and a well shaft of Etruscan origin that descended approximately 36 meters into the volcanic plateau beneath the city, its lower levels cutting through geological strata that predate the Etruscan presence in the region. Orvieto sits on a tufa plateau that has been inhabited and excavated from below for millennia. More than 1,200 subterranean cavities have now been mapped beneath the city, carved by Etruscans, Romans, and medieval inhabitants across successive centuries. The Pozzo della Cava, the well of the cave, is connected to this network, and its rediscovery in 1984 opened a passage into a layered record of occupation that spans roughly 2,500 years in a single vertical structure. What makes the Pozzo della Cava genuinely cryptic is what was found at its various levels. Etruscan ceramics from the 6th to 4th century BCE were recovered alongside Roman-era objects and medieval deposits, indicating the shaft was in continuous use across approximately 2 millennia. More troubling are the tool marks in the lowest levels of the shaft, in strata that predate the Etruscan period, which some researchers suggest are inconsistent with known Etruscan or Roman implements, though this interpretation remains contested among archaeologists. The broader subterranean network beneath Orvieto continues to be mapped. Parts of it extend beneath active buildings, and the full extent of what was carved below this city is still unknown. The Pozzo della Cava is now open to visitors, who can descend into it and observe the layered deposits of civilizations that used the same shaft for purposes that shifted across centuries, as each new culture inherited a structure it did not build. Someone was digging into this plateau before the people we credit with digging it. That much the geology confirms. What they were looking for in the rock below the rock is a question the shaft itself cannot answer. Number 7. The Cistern of Theodosius. In 2017, municipal workers conducting a routine infrastructure survey beneath the Bayezid district of Istanbul broke through a floor and fell into a silence that had lasted for centuries. Below them was a vaulted underground cistern, its marble columns still standing, water still present at its base, its ceiling intact, and its existence entirely absent from the city's working records. It had been built under Emperor Theodosius II of the Byzantine Empire, completed sometime between 428 and 443 CE, and then, at some point in the long transition from Byzantium to Ottoman Constantinople, simply forgotten. The Theodosius cistern had once been part of the hydraulic infrastructure that kept Constantinople alive. Like the more famous Basilica Cistern nearby, it collected and stored water drawn from aqueducts feeding the city from the west. Its preliminary dimensions, still being assessed as of the most recent published surveys, suggest a chamber approximately 45 meters long and 25 meters wide, supported by 32 marble columns bearing Byzantine carvings, with a depth still being measured as excavation and drainage work continues. What separates this cistern from Orvieto's underground chambers is the quality of its concealment. The Theodosius cistern had no visible entry point at street level, no access shaft that a curious resident might stumble across. It sat beneath one of Istanbul's most trafficked public squares, Bayezid Square, for centuries, with the city going about its business directly above a vaulted Byzantine chamber, large enough to hold tens of thousands of cubic meters of water. Preliminary conservation work began following the 2017 discovery, and surveys to establish the cistern's full dimensions are ongoing. Parts of it extend beneath occupied buildings, which complicates access. The full picture of what Theodosius built beneath the square has not yet emerged. A 1,500-year-old chamber sat beneath a busy city square for centuries, and the city had no idea it was there. That is not a mystery of origin. It is a mystery of forgetting, and in its own way, it is just as unsettling. Number 6. The Yerebaton Cistern. By the end of the 6th century CE, The Byzantine Emperor Justinian I had built, beneath the streets of Constantinople, a subterranean structure of a scale that had no parallel in the ancient world. Completed around 532 CE, the Yerebatan cistern, known also as the Basilica Cistern, measured 138 meters by 64.6 meters and held approximately 80,000 cubic meters of water beneath the Sultanahmet district. Its ceiling supported by 336 marble columns, each 9 meters tall, most of them plundered from earlier Roman structures across the empire. It was a cathedral built for darkness and water, and it has survived largely intact for nearly 1,500 years. Justinian built the cistern to supply the Great Palace of Constantinople, and it served that purpose through the Byzantine and Ottoman periods alike. French scholar Petrus Gillius rediscovered it in 1545 after noticing that residents of the district were lowering buckets through holes in their basement floors to draw water and catch fish. The cistern had been forgotten at the administrative level, while the city unknowingly lived above it, drawing from it without knowing what it was. At the far northwest corner of the cistern, 2 of the 336 columns rest on bases carved into the face of Medusa, the figure from Greek mythology whose gaze turned observers to stone. One head is positioned upside down, the other is rotated 90 degrees onto its side. They are not accidental orientations. They are precise, deliberate, and clearly the work of someone who made a considered decision about which direction each face should point. No Byzantine text, decree, architectural note, or religious document has ever been found that explains why those 2 heads were placed that way. Scholars have proposed that the inversions were intended to neutralize the mythological power of Medusa's gaze, or that they were simply repurposed as structural fill with no symbolic intention. Neither explanation has been confirmed. Neither can be. The greatest cistern of the ancient world has, at its foundation, a deliberate act whose meaning its builders chose not to record. Whatever the reason those faces were turned away from the living, it went to the grave with the people who made that decision. Number 5. The sacred cenote. Between approximately 600 CE and the Spanish conquest of the Yucatan in the 16th century, the Maya of Chichen Itza maintained a practice at a natural limestone sinkhole on the northern edge of their city that the Bishop of Yucatan, Diego de Landa, documented in 1566, with a clarity that has never been disputed. Into this circular opening in the earth, approximately 60 meters across, with a water surface 27 meters below the rim, the Maya cast jade, gold, rubber, copal incense, woven textiles, and human beings, all offered to Chak, the deity of rain and water, in rituals that continued for the better part of 1,000 years. American consul Edward Herbert Thompson confirmed what DeLanda had recorded when he began dredging the cenote in 1904 and physically descended into it in 1909, becoming the first person to do so in the modern era. He recovered gold discs, jade masks, and skeletal remains, which he shipped to the Peabody Museum at Harvard University, triggering a repatriation dispute with Mexico that took decades to resolve. In the 1960s, a second recovery effort led by archaeologist Roman Piña-Chan on behalf of Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History extracted more than 4,000 additional artifacts and confirmed the skeletal remains of at least 42 individuals. The physical evidence confirmed sacrifice. What the subsequent isotopic analysis revealed was something more troubling. Stable isotope studies of the skeletal remains, which trace the geographic origin of individuals through the chemical signature absorbed from local food and water during life, found that some of the people thrown into the cenote had come from regions far outside the Maya lowlands. They had been sourced, transported, and deposited from hundreds of kilometers away. The sacred cenote was not a site of spontaneous or localized violence. It was a program sustained across centuries, geographically ambitious, institutionally organized, and hydraulically permanent. What the cenote received, the cenote kept. The water at 13.5 meters depth held these offerings in a darkness that no one could reach, and no one attempted to. The sacred cenote ran for roughly 1,000 years without interruption, drawing victims from across Mesoamerica for a ritual whose theological logic was absolute and whose physical record is now one of the most extensively excavated sacrificial sites on Earth. It was not abandoned. It was still in use when the Spanish arrived. Number 4. The Well of Barhout. In the remote Al-Mahra governorate of eastern Yemen, in a stretch of desert that requires hours of off-road travel to approach from the nearest inhabited settlement, there is a circular opening in the earth approximately 30 meters across that local Bedouin tradition has called Bir Barhout, the Well of Barhout, for as long as anyone in the region can recall. In classical Islamic texts, the name appears as a location associated with the souls of the unrighteous dead. In October 2021, a team from the Yemeni Caves Exploration Team, working alongside Omani Kavers, became the first documented expedition to physically enter it. The shaft descends vertically into the earth. Its depth has not been confirmed. Estimates from available geological assessments range from 112 meters to more than 250 meters, but no expedition has reached the bottom. The 2021 team descended to approximately 50 meters before conditions inside the shaft prevented further progress. They reported dead birds on the interior walls, a temperature and humidity environment distinctly different from the surface above, and an unidentified smell rising from below that none of the team members could account for. The formation is tentatively attributed to karst collapse, a process by which soluble rock dissolves beneath the surface until the ceiling gives way. But the Well of Barhout's near-perfect circularity and sheer vertical depth are atypical for natural sinkholes in this geological region, and no peer-reviewed geological study of this specific site has been published. The working hypothesis is karst. The evidence for it is incomplete. What makes this well genuinely fathomless, in both the literal and figurative sense, is the convergence of circumstances around it. It is ancient enough to have entered classical religious literature. It is remote enough that systematic study has been functionally impossible. It sits in a country whose ongoing conflict has made scientific fieldwork in this region practically unreachable. The 2021 expedition was the first, and, as of available records, the last attempt to descend into it. The Well of Barhout has been known for over 1,000 years. It has been actively avoided by every culture that has lived near it. A team of experienced cavers descended 50 meters into it in 2021 and could not continue. No one has been back. The bottom remains unmeasured, and whatever produces the smell rising from below has not been identified. Number 3. The Osiris Shaft. In 1999, Egyptologist Zahi Hawass led a joint Egyptian-Italian expedition beneath the Giza Plateau in Egypt, using pumps to clear the groundwater that had blocked access to the lowest level of a shaft cut directly below the causeway of the Pyramid of Khafra. What they found at approximately 40 meters depth in a chamber carved from the bedrock and accessible only through a flooded passage was a granite sarcophagus with no inscription, no identification, no cartouche, and no surrounding text of any kind, sitting at the center of a carved room supported by 4 stone pillars, in a space that appeared in no known ancient Egyptian record and had no verified connection to any named individual, dynasty, or ritual function. The shaft is known in 3 levels. The uppermost level served as storage. The second level, attributed to the 26th dynasty of approximately 664 to 525 BCE, based on recovered artifacts and niches containing skeletal remains, showed evidence of organized funerary use within a documented historical period. The third level, accessible only after Hawass's team pumped out the standing water, is the one for which no explanation has been confirmed. Hawass named the shaft the Osiris Shaft, a designation he gave it himself, as no ancient Egyptian text has been found that references this structure by any name at all. The sealed granite sarcophagus in the lowest chamber has not been definitively dated. Its stylistic characteristics are inconclusive because it carries no inscriptions. Researchers including geologist Robert Schoch and writer John Anthony West have argued that the lowest level of the shaft predates the dynastic period entirely, placing its construction before 3100 BCE and potentially long before, though this interpretation is not accepted by mainstream Egyptology, which holds that the evidence for pre-dynastic construction has not been demonstrated. What cannot be disputed is the physical fact of the structure. Someone carved a room 40 meters below the Giza Plateau, placed a sealed granite container at its center, arranged 4 pillars around it, and ensured that the access route would flood, making casual discovery impossible. This was done on a plateau that has been studied more intensively than almost any other site in human history. A century and a half of Egyptology produced no reference to this chamber before the pumps were turned on in 1999. Below the most examined archaeological site on Earth, someone built a room they did not want found, placed something inside it they did not name, and left no record of having been there. After 125 years of sustained Egyptological study on the Giza Plateau, we still cannot say who built that room, when they built it, or what they placed inside the sarcophagus at its center. Number 2. The Well of Zamzam. In the courtyard of the Masjid al-Haram Mosque in Mecca, Saudi Arabia, approximately 20 meters from the Kaaba, there is a well that has been in continuous documented use for at least 2,000 years, and that Islamic tradition, shared by approximately 1.8 billion people, dates to the time of the patriarch Ibrahim and his son Ishmael, placing its origin at roughly 4,000 years ago. The 12th century geographer Al-Idrisi recorded it. The Islamic historical tradition has documented it without interruption from the 7th century CE forward. In all of that recorded history, across every source that references it, the Well of Zamzam has never once been recorded as running dry. The well descends approximately 42 meters in total, reaching the water table at around 30 meters depth. Saudi Geological Survey studies confirm that Zamzam taps a genuine aquifer fed by the surrounding mountain ranges, the Jabal Abu Kubais and Jabal Ajyad, through a permeable geological formation beneath the city. The water's chemical composition, consistently high in calcium, magnesium, bicarbonate, and fluoride, has been confirmed by multiple independent laboratory analyses as consistent with deep geological filtration. It is not surface water. It is ancient water, drawn from deep rock. The hydrological difficulty is not whether the aquifer exists. It clearly does. The difficulty is the extraction rate. During the Hajj pilgrimage, when up to 3 million people converge on Mecca, the well system, which now operates with electric pumps rather than manual drawing, distributes approximately 700,000 liters of water per day. Hydrogeological modeling of the known aquifer geometry has consistently found that the rate of recharge relative to the volume of extraction is not straightforwardly accounted for by the identified geology. Scientists who have studied the system describe it as operating at the edge of what the known aquifer should support, and yet it does not fail. The Saudi government conducted formal hydrogeological surveys in 1971 and again comprehensively in the 2000s. Both confirmed the aquifer's integrity. Neither produced a full explanation of why extraction at this scale has not degraded the water table across centuries of continuous use, accelerating sharply in the modern era as Hajj attendance has grown from hundreds of thousands to millions. The Well of Zamzam has supplied water to pilgrims for as long as the written record of this region reaches, and every scientific survey conducted on it has confirmed both that the water is real and that the model does not entirely account for its persistence. Some ancient things simply continue. The well is still there, and the water is still rising. Number 1. The Wilsford Shaft. In 1958, archaeologist Paul Ashby began excavating a site near Wilsford in Wiltshire, England, approximately 2 kilometers south of Stonehenge, and found something that appeared on no map and fit no existing category. Concealed beneath the surface of Salisbury Plain was a shaft driven vertically into the chalk bedrock, 1.8 meters in diameter and 30 meters deep, so narrow that a single person could barely turn around inside it. Radiocarbon dating and artifact analysis, published in the Wiltshire Archaeological Magazine in 1966 following 4 years of excavation, placed its construction at approximately 1400 to 1300 BCE in the Late Bronze Age, making it contemporary with the final active phases of the monument visible on the horizon above it. The people who dug the Wilsford shaft were the same people who last modified Stonehenge. That is not an inference or an approximation. The archaeological dating is consistent across both sites. The civilization that raised and arranged those stones also drove this shaft into the earth nearby, and the question of why they did it is one that the shaft itself and every artifact recovered from it makes impossible to answer with confidence. The shaft was not a well in any practical sense. At 30 meters depth, it did reach the water table, and Ashby's team found groundwater still present at the base during excavation. But a shaft 1.8 meters wide and 30 meters deep cannot function as a domestic or agricultural water source. It is too narrow for effective drawing and too isolated for communal use. What Ashby found at the bottom was not infrastructure. It was amber beads, bone and antler pins, shale rings, wooden containers, animal bones from cattle and deer, and traces of cordage suggesting objects had been lowered deliberately on ropes. Every artifact in the shaft had been placed there. Nothing had fallen in by accident. The scholarly consensus, established through Ashby's original excavation report and supported by subsequent Bronze Age studies, is that the Wilsford shaft was a ritual structure, a votive deposit site constructed to reach the boundary between the world above ground and whatever the Bronze Age mind believed existed below it. In a pre-scientific cosmology, the place where the earth meets water deep underground is not simply a geological feature. It is a threshold. It is the edge of one world and the beginning of another. The objects lowered to the bottom were not lost. They were sent. No written language existed in Bronze Age Britain. The people who built the Wilsford shaft left no text, no symbol, no inscription that might tell us what they believed they were communicating with, what they expected in return, or whether they ever received an answer. We have the shaft. We have the offerings. We have the fact that they dug 30 meters into the earth, in a location 2 kilometers from the most architecturally significant monument of their civilization, and placed gifts at the bottom with a rope. The Bronze Age builders of Stonehenge also dug a shaft into the earth and sent gifts down into the dark, because they believed with total conviction that something below was worth reaching. 3,000 years later, the shaft is still there. The offerings are in a museum, and the only thing we know for certain is that whatever they were trying to reach, they were sure enough of its existence to spend the labor of many people across weeks or months of work to get closer to it. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.